The bullet grazed Ryder Crawford's shoulder as he dove behind the overturned wagon, his heart pounding so hard he thought it might burst through his ribs. Three men with rifles stood across the dusty street in Hill City, South Dakota, their faces twisted with anger over a card game gone wrong, and Ryder knew he had maybe 30 seconds before they circled around and finished what they started. He reached for his Colt, fired two shots to keep them back, then bolted down the alley between the general store and the blacksmith shop, his boots kicking up clouds of dirt as the September sun of 1878 beat down mercilessly. He could hear their shouts behind him, could hear the click of hammers being pulled back, and he ran faster than he ever had in his 24 years of life. The back of the general store had a window half open, and Ryder didn't think twice before hurling himself through it, crashing onto a wooden floor in a tangle of limbs and broken glass. Pain shot through his shoulder where the bullet had clipped him, but he scrambled to his feet, his hand still gripping his revolver. The room was dim, stacked high with crates and barrels, and he could hear footsteps outside getting closer. He looked around frantically for another exit, his chest heaving, sweat dripping down his face. "In here, quickly!" a woman's voice whispered urgently from somewhere to his left. Ryder spun around and saw her standing in a doorway he hadn't noticed, a slender woman with dark auburn hair pulled back in a practical bun, her green eyes wide but steady. She gestured impatiently, and he didn't hesitate. He rushed through the doorway, and she closed it behind him, sliding a heavy bolt into place, just as he heard boots stomping into the storeroom he'd just left. "Where did he go?" a rough voice demanded. "Through the back door, most likely," another answered. "Come on, we will catch him on Main Street." The boots retreated, and Ryder let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. He looked around and found himself in what appeared to be a small living quarters behind the store. A narrow bed stood against one wall, a small stove against another, and a table with two chairs sat beneath a window with lace curtains. The woman stood, with her back against the door, watching him with a mixture of wariness and curiosity. "You are bleeding," she said matter-of-factly. Ryder glanced down at his shoulder, where his shirt was torn, and blood was seeping through. "It is just a graze. I will be fine." "Sit down before you fall down," she ordered, moving past him to a basin of water on a small stand. "You look ready to collapse." He wanted to argue, but his legs suddenly felt like they were made of water, and he sank into one of the chairs gratefully. The woman brought over the basin and a clean cloth, setting them on the table before pulling his torn shirt aside to examine the wound. Her touch was gentle but efficient, and Ryder found himself studying her face in the lamplight. She was beautiful in a quiet, understated way, with delicate features and a sprinkling of freckles across her nose. She looked to be about his age, maybe a year or two younger. "What is your name?" he asked, trying to ignore the sting as she cleaned the wound. "Rebecca Adams," she replied without looking up from her work. "And you are?" "Ryder Crawford. I am much obliged for your help, Miss Adams." "It is Mrs. Adams, actually," she said, and Ryder felt an unexpected pang of disappointment. "Though I am a widow, my husband died 2 years ago." "I am sorry for your loss." She shrugged slightly, finishing with his shoulder and stepping back. "The wound is clean. It should heal well enough if you keep it that way. What were those men chasing you for?" Ryder hesitated, then figured he owed her honesty after she'd saved his life. "There was a card game at the saloon. I won fairly, but they claimed I was cheating. I was not, but they would not listen to reason." Rebecca studied him for a long moment, then nodded. "I believe you. You do not have the look of a cheat. Foolish, perhaps, to play cards with men like that, but not dishonest." Despite everything, Ryder found himself smiling. Foolish is probably accurate. She returned to the basin and washed the blood from her hands, then dried them on her apron. "Those men will be looking for you. You cannot leave until after dark, and even then you will need to be careful." "I do not want to put you in danger," Ryder protested. "You already have," Rebecca said with a slight smile. "Might as well finish what we started." "Are you hungry?" As if in answer, Ryder's stomach growled loudly. He hadn't eaten since breakfast, and that had been just stale bread and weak coffee. Rebecca laughed, a sound that was surprisingly musical, and moved to the stove. She built up the fire and began preparing what looked like stew from a pot she had sitting nearby. "Tell me about yourself, Mr. Crawford," she said as she worked. "What brings you to Hill City?" Ryder shifted in his chair, uncomfortable with the question, but feeling like he owed her more than just silence. "I have been drifting mostly, working odd jobs here and there. I spent some time as a ranch hand down in Wyoming, then did some mining up in Montana. Heard there might be work here in the Black Hills, so I came to see. And the card game? I was lonely, I suppose. Thought I might make some friends, or at least pass the evening in company." Rebecca turned to look at him, her expression sympathetic. "It must be hard moving from place to place with no roots anywhere." "It is all I have known," Ryder admitted. "My parents died when I was young. Fever took them both within a week of each other. I have been on my own since I was 15. "That is a long time to be alone," Rebecca said softly. They fell into a comfortable silence as she finished preparing the food. When she set a bowl of stew in front of him, Ryder realized he was ravenous. He ate quickly, hardly tasting it, then felt embarrassed at his lack of manners. But Rebecca just smiled and refilled his bowl without comment. After they had both eaten, Rebecca cleared the dishes and then retrieved a book from a small shelf on the wall. She sat down at the table across from him and opened it, and Ryder felt his stomach clench with a familiar anxiety. "Do you read, Mr. Crawford?" she asked casually. Ryder felt heat creep up his neck. This was always the worst part, the moment when people realized his secret shame. "No, madam, I never learned." Rebecca looked up from her book, but there was no judgment in her eyes, only curiosity. "Can you write your name?" "No, madam. I cannot read a single word on paper. Never had the chance to learn when I was young, and after that, well, I was too busy trying to survive." "That must make life very difficult," Rebecca said thoughtfully. "How do you know what signs say, or read letters, or keep accounts?" "I manage," Ryder said defensively. "I am good with numbers in my head, and I can usually tell what a sign says from the pictures or by asking someone." "I was not criticizing you," Rebecca said gently. "I was just thinking that if you are going to be here for a few hours anyway, perhaps I could teach you something." Ryder stared at her. "Teach me." "Letters," Rebecca said, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. "The alphabet. To start, it is not as difficult as you might think, and even learning a little bit could help you." "Why would you want to do that?" Ryder asked suspiciously. "What is in it for you?" Rebecca closed her book and looked at him seriously. "My husband could not read either. He always said he was too old to learn, too set in his ways. But I saw how it hurt him, how he felt less than other men because of it. I wished I had pushed harder to teach him, but I was young and foolish and thought we had all the time in the world." Her voice grew thick with emotion. "We did not, and I have regretted not trying harder ever since." Ryder felt something shift in his chest, a strange warmth spreading through him. "I am sorry," he said quietly. "That must have been hard." "It was," Rebecca agreed. "But perhaps I can do for you what I failed to do for him, if you are willing to try." Ryder looked at her, at the earnest hope in her green eyes, and found himself nodding before he could think better of it. "All right, but I warn you, I am probably too old and stubborn to learn much." "Nonsense," Rebecca said briskly, standing up and retrieving a piece of paper and a pencil from a drawer. "You are young and clearly intelligent. You just never had someone patient enough to teach you properly." She sat back down and began to draw large, clear letters on the paper. "This is A," she said, pointing to the first letter. "It makes the sound ah like an apple." For the next 2 hours, as the sun set outside and the room grew dark except for the lamp on the table, Rebecca taught Ryder the alphabet. She was patient and encouraging, never making him feel stupid when he confused letters or forgot what she had just told him. She drew pictures to help him remember, associating each letter with a word he would know. A was for apple, B was for barrel, C was for cattle. Ryder found himself getting caught up in it, his earlier fear and exhaustion forgotten. There was something magical about watching the meaningless squiggles on paper transform into something that had meaning, that represented sounds and words. When he successfully recognized the letter R without prompting, Rebecca's face lit up with such genuine delight that Ryder felt his heart skip a beat. "That is wonderful, Ryder," she exclaimed. "R for Ryder. That is your letter." "And R for Rebecca," he said, surprising himself with the observation. She smiled, a real smile that reached her eyes and made her whole face glow. "Yes, exactly. We share a letter." There was a moment of charged silence between them, and Ryder became acutely aware of how close they were sitting, how he could smell the faint scent of lavender that seemed to cling to her. He cleared his throat and looked back down at the paper. "What about the rest?" he asked. Rebecca blinked and seemed to shake herself slightly. "Right, yes, let us continue." They worked through the rest of the alphabet, though Ryder knew he would not remember all of it. But he had made a start, and that was more than he had ever expected. When Rebecca finally set down the pencil and stretched, Ryder realized how late it had gotten. "I should go," he said reluctantly. "Those men are probably long gone by now, and I have imposed on your hospitality long enough." "Where will you go?" Rebecca asked. "I have a room at the boarding house on the edge of town," Ryder said. "I will slip out the back and make my way there." Rebecca walked him to the door, unbolting it quietly. Before he left, she pressed something into his hand. He looked down and saw it was the paper with the alphabet on it. "Keep this," she said. "Practice when you can, and if you are still in town tomorrow evening, come back. We can continue your lessons." Ryder looked from the paper to her face, seeing something there that made his breath catch. "Are you sure? I do not want to be a bother." "You are not a bother," Rebecca said firmly. "I enjoyed this evening, more than I have enjoyed anything in a long time. Please come back if you can." "I will," Ryder promised, carefully folding the paper and tucking it into his shirt pocket. "Thank you, Rebecca, for everything." "Be careful," she said, and the genuine concern in her voice made that warm feeling in his chest grow stronger. Ryder slipped out into the night, moving carefully through the shadows until he reached the boarding house. The woman who ran it gave him a sharp look when he came in with his torn, bloody shirt, but she did not ask questions. That was one of the things Ryder appreciated about the West. People minded their own business. In his small room, Ryder carefully unfolded the paper and studied the letters by the light of his single candle. He traced them with his finger, whispering the sounds Rebecca had taught him. A, B, C, D. He got to R and smiled, thinking of how she had said it was their letter. It seemed impossible that just that morning he had been a drifter with no prospects and no connections, and now he had met someone who made him want to stay in one place for the first time in years. He knew it was foolish to get attached. He was a nobody, a man who could not even read his own name. Rebecca was a respectable widow who owned a business, someone who deserved better than a drifter like him. But even knowing all that, Ryder could not stop thinking about the way her face had lit up when he recognized that first letter, or the sound of her laugh, or the gentle touch of her hands when she tended his wound. The next day, Ryder found work helping to repair a fence for a rancher on the outskirts of town. The work was hard and hot, and his wounded shoulder ached, but he was grateful for the distraction and the money. He spent the whole day thinking about whether he should really go back to Rebecca's that evening. It seemed presumptuous to assume she had really meant the invitation, and he did not want to make a fool of himself. But as the sun began to set, Ryder found his feet carrying him toward the general store almost of their own accord. He had cleaned up as best he could, washing his face and hands at the pump and changing into his only other shirt. His heart was pounding as he approached the back door, wondering if he was making a terrible mistake. Before he could knock, the door opened and Rebecca stood there smiling at him. "I was hoping you would come," she said simply, stepping aside to let him in. "I said I would," Ryder replied, feeling suddenly shy. "Come, sit," Rebecca said, gesturing to the table where she already had paper and pencil laid out. "We have much work to do." That evening, Rebecca taught him to recognize simple three-letter words: cat, dog, hat, rat. It was slow going, and Ryder made many mistakes, but Rebecca never lost patience. She would just gently correct him and have him try again. When he successfully read the word red without help, she clapped her hands in delight. "You are a natural student," she said warmly. "I knew you would be." "You are a natural teacher," Ryder countered. "I never thought I could learn this." "You can learn anything if you have the right teacher and the will to try," Rebecca said. "My husband used to say that learning was for children, but I never believed that. We can grow and change at any age." "Tell me about him," Ryder said impulsively. "Your husband, if you do not mind talking about him." Rebecca was quiet for a moment, her fingers tracing the edge of the paper. "His name was Thomas. We married when I was 19, and he was a good man, kind and hardworking. He bought this store so we could have a stable life together. We were happy in our way." "In your way?" Ryder asked gently. Rebecca sighed. "We were fond of each other, but it was not a great passion. Our parents arranged the match, and we both agreed to it because it made sense. Thomas needed a wife to help run the store, and I needed security. We were friends more than anything else." "Is that why you never had children?" Ryder asked, then immediately regretted the personal question. "I am sorry, that was inappropriate." "No, it is all right," Rebecca said. "We tried, but it never happened. Perhaps it was not meant to be." She looked up at him, her green eyes serious. "I cared for Thomas, and I grieved when he died. But I cannot say I was in love with him. Is that a terrible thing to admit?" "No," Ryder said firmly. "It is honest, and honesty is never terrible." They continued their lesson until late in the evening, and when Ryder left, Rebecca walked him to the door again. This time, their goodbye felt weighted with something unspoken, and Ryder felt his heart racing as he looked down at her. "Same time tomorrow?" he asked, his voice coming out rougher than he intended. "Yes," Rebecca said softly. "I will be here." As Ryder walked back to the boarding house, he realized he was smiling like a fool. He did not care. For the first time in his life, he had something to look forward to, someone who made him want to be better than he was. The days fell into a pattern. Ryder would work whatever odd jobs he could find during the day, then spend his evenings with Rebecca, learning to read by the fire she built against the growing autumn chill. They progressed from simple words to longer ones, from recognizing letters to understanding how they fit together to make meaning. Ryder proved to be an eager student, practicing on his own whenever he had a spare moment, determined to make Rebecca proud. But the lessons were only part of what drew him back each evening. He found himself captivated by Rebecca herself, by the stories she told about running the store and dealing with difficult customers, by her quiet strength and gentle humor. She told him about growing up in Missouri, about how her father had been a teacher and had instilled in her a love of learning. She talked about the books she had read, painting pictures with her words of places and people Ryder had never imagined. In turn, Ryder found himself opening up in ways he never had before. He told her about his childhood, what little he could remember of it. He talked about the years of wandering, the loneliness that had become so familiar he barely noticed it anymore. He described the vast landscapes he had seen, the mountains and plains and rivers, trying to give her a glimpse of the world beyond Hill City. "You make it sound beautiful," Rebecca said one evening in early October, about 3 weeks after they first met. They were sitting closer than usual, the fire crackling warmly beside them as the wind howled outside. "It is beautiful," Ryder agreed, "but it is also lonely. I never realized how lonely until I met you." The words hung in the air between them, and Ryder felt his heart start to pound. He had not meant to say that, had not meant to reveal so much. But looking at Rebecca's face in the firelight, seeing the way her eyes had widened and her lips had parted slightly, he could not bring himself to take it back. "Ryder," she said softly, and there was something in her voice that made him lean closer. "Rebecca, I know I have no right," he began, the words tumbling out in a rush. "I am just a drifter with no education and no prospects. But these past weeks with you have been the happiest of my life. You have given me so much more than reading lessons. You have given me hope and purpose and something to look forward to each day. I think I am falling in love with you, and I needed you to know that, even if you do not feel the same way." For a long moment, Rebecca just stared at him, and Ryder felt his stomach drop. He had ruined everything, had moved too fast, and scared her away. But then she reached out and took his hand, her fingers threading through his. "I feel the same way," she whispered. "I have been trying not to, telling myself it was too soon, that I barely know you. But the truth is, I know you better than I ever knew Thomas. I know your heart and your determination and your kindness, and I am falling in love with you too." Ryder felt like he could not breathe. "Really? Really," Rebecca confirmed. And then she was leaning forward, and he was meeting her halfway, and their lips touched in a kiss that was both tentative and electric. It was soft and sweet, tasting of the coffee they had been drinking, and Ryder felt something in his chest that might have been his heart breaking open. When they pulled apart, both breathless, Rebecca's face was flushed, and her eyes were bright. "I have wanted to do that for weeks," she admitted. "Me too," Ryder said, then kissed her again, longer this time, his hand coming up to cup her cheek. She leaned into his touch, and Ryder felt a wave of emotion so strong it nearly overwhelmed him. This was what he had been missing all those lonely years, this connection, this feeling of coming home. They sat together by the fire for a long time after that, talking and kissing and making plans. Ryder told her he wanted to stay in Hill City, wanted to find permanent work and build a life here. Rebecca said she would help him, that together they could make it work. They both knew it would not be easy. People would talk about the widow Adams courting a drifter, and there would be those who looked down on Ryder for his lack of education. But sitting there with Rebecca in his arms, Ryder felt like he could face anything. "Read me something," Rebecca said suddenly, pulling back to look at him. "Read me one of the passages we have been practicing." Ryder reached for the book they had been using, a simple primer meant for children. He opened it to a page they had worked on the day before and began to read slowly, haltingly, but with growing confidence. The cat sat on the mat. The dog ran to the cat. The cat jumped high. The dog waited below. It was simple, almost childish, but when Ryder finished and looked up at Rebecca, there were tears in her eyes. "You did it," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "You really did it. I am so proud of you, Ryder." Ryder felt his own eyes sting. "I could not have done it without you. You are the best teacher, the best person I have ever known." They kissed again, and this time it was deeper, more passionate. Ryder felt desire stirring in him, but he pulled back, not wanting to disrespect Rebecca or move too fast. She seemed to understand, smiling at him with a mixture of tenderness and frustration. "We should probably say goodnight," she said reluctantly. "Probably," Ryder agreed, but neither of them moved for several long minutes. When Ryder finally left that night, he felt like he was walking on air. He lay in his narrow bed at the boarding house, unable to sleep, his mind replaying every moment of the evening. The feel of Rebecca's lips on his, the sound of her saying she loved him, the look in her eyes when he read to her. It all felt like a dream, something too good to be real. But it was real, and over the following weeks, their relationship deepened. Ryder found steady work at the local stable, mucking stalls and caring for horses. It was not glamorous work, but it paid regularly, and the owner seemed to like him. He continued his reading lessons with Rebecca each evening, progressing from the primer to actual books. He was still slow, and there were many words he did not know, but he was improving steadily. The people of Hill City began to notice that the widow Adams was being courted by the new stable hand. Some approved, saying it was good to see Rebecca happy again. Others were more skeptical, wondering what a drifter like Ryder Crawford could offer a respectable woman like her. But Ryder and Rebecca did not let the gossip bother them. They were too caught up in each other, in the joy of their growing love. In November, Ryder asked Rebecca to marry him. He did it one evening after their reading lesson, getting down on one knee in front of the fire. "Rebecca Adams, I know I do not have much to offer you," he said, his heart pounding so hard he thought she must be able to hear it. "I do not own land or have money saved, but I love you with everything I am, and I promise to spend the rest of my life working hard to give you the life you deserve. Will you marry me?" Rebecca's eyes filled with tears, but she was smiling as she pulled him to his feet. "Yes," she said simply. "Yes, I will marry you, Ryder Crawford. Not because of what you can give me materially, but because you have already given me something more valuable. You have given me your heart and your trust and the privilege of watching you grow. I love you, and I want to spend my life with you." They were married in a small ceremony at the church in Hill City on a cold December day in 1878. The preacher read from the Bible, and Ryder followed along in his own copy, one that Rebecca had given him as a wedding gift. He could not read all of it yet, but he recognized enough words to know what was being said, and the accomplishment filled him with pride. After the ceremony, they had a small gathering at the general store, which Rebecca had closed for the day. A handful of friends and neighbors came to wish them well, and even some of the people who had been skeptical about their relationship seemed genuinely happy for them. Ryder stood with his arm around Rebecca's waist, marveling at how his life had changed in just 3 months. That night, in the room behind the store that was now their home, Ryder and Rebecca consummated their marriage. It was tender and passionate, a physical expression of the love they had already declared in words. Afterward, lying in Rebecca's arms, Ryder felt a contentment he had never known before. "Thank you," he whispered into her hair. "For what?" Rebecca asked sleepily. "For everything. For saving me that first night. For teaching me to read. For loving me. For making me feel like I belong somewhere." Rebecca turned in his arms to look at him, her green eyes serious. "You do belong, Ryder. You belong with me, and I belong with you. We are a family now." Family. The word settled into Ryder's chest like a warm coal, glowing and permanent. He had never had a family before, not one that he could remember. But now he did, and he vowed silently to never take it for granted. The winter of 1878 was harsh, with deep snows that made travel difficult. But Ryder and Rebecca were cozy in their room behind the store, spending their evenings by the fire. Ryder continued to improve his reading, and Rebecca began teaching him to write as well. His handwriting was clumsy at first, his letters shaky and uneven, but with practice it improved. The first time he successfully wrote both their names, Rebecca kissed him so enthusiastically they ended up forgetting about the lesson for the rest of the evening. In addition to his work at the stable, Ryder began helping Rebecca with the store. He learned inventory, how to measure out goods, how to interact with customers. Some of them were surprised to find him there, the former drifter, now a respectable shopkeeper. But Ryder handled their skepticism with grace, determined to prove himself worthy of Rebecca's faith in him. One day, in late January of 1879, a man came into the store who Ryder recognized immediately. It was one of the 3 men who had chased him that first day, the one who had accused him of cheating at cards. Ryder felt his body tense, his hand instinctively moving toward where his gun would have been if he were still wearing it. But Rebecca had asked him to stop wearing his gun in the store, saying it made customers nervous, so he was unarmed. The man stopped short when he saw Ryder, his eyes widening in recognition. For a long moment, they just stared at each other, the tension thick in the air. Then, to Ryder's surprise, the man removed his hat and nodded respectfully. "Crawford," he said gruffly, "I owe you an apology. I found out later that the real cheat that night was my partner, not you. He was using marked cards, and I was too drunk to notice. You won fairly, and I am sorry for causing trouble." Ryder blinked, not sure he had heard correctly. "You are apologizing?" "I am," the man confirmed. "It was not right what we did. I heard you settled down here, married the widow Adams. Seems like you are doing well for yourself." "I am," Ryder said slowly, still not quite believing this was happening. "I appreciate your apology. It takes a big man to admit when he was wrong." The man nodded again, then purchased some tobacco and left without further conversation. After he was gone, Rebecca emerged from the back room where she had been pretending not to listen. "That was unexpected," she said. "Very," Ryder agreed, "but I am glad it happened. I have been worried about running into those men again, wondering if there would be more trouble." "You handled it well," Rebecca said, coming over to kiss him gently. "You are becoming quite the civilized shopkeeper, Mr. Crawford." Ryder laughed and pulled her close. "Do not let that fool you, Mrs. Crawford. I am still a cowboy at heart." "I know," Rebecca said, her eyes twinkling. "That is part of why I love you." Spring came to Hill City, with a rush of melting snow and budding trees. The store became busier as ranchers and farmers prepared for the planting season, and Ryder found himself working long hours. But he did not mind. He enjoyed the work, enjoyed feeling useful and productive, and every evening, no matter how tired he was, he still made time to read with Rebecca by the fire. He had graduated from primers and simple books to actual novels now, though he still stumbled over complicated words and had to ask Rebecca for help. She never seemed to mind, patiently explaining pronunciation and meaning. His favorite book so far had been a collection of tales about the frontier, stories of mountain men and trappers and adventurers. He would read them aloud to Rebecca, and she would listen with rapt attention, even though she had probably read the stories a dozen times before. In May, Rebecca told him she was pregnant. They had been hoping for this, talking about it in whispered conversations late at night, but the reality of it still took Ryder's breath away. He was going to be a father. The thought terrified and thrilled him in equal measure. "Are you happy?" Rebecca asked anxiously, searching his face. "Happy?" Ryder repeated, then laughed and swept her up in his arms, spinning her around until she shrieked in surprise and delight. "Rebecca, I am more than happy. I am overjoyed. Terrified, but overjoyed." "I am terrified too," Rebecca admitted when he set her down. "But I know we can do this together." "Together," Ryder agreed, kissing her soundly. The pregnancy was not easy for Rebecca. She was sick for the first few months, and Ryder took over most of the work in the store, determined to let her rest as much as possible. He read to her in the evenings when she was too tired to teach him anything new, choosing books he thought might distract her from her discomfort. Sometimes she would fall asleep to the sound of his voice, and Ryder would carefully mark their place and pull a blanket over her, watching her sleep with a fierce protectiveness he had never felt before. As summer turned to autumn, Rebecca's belly grew round, and Ryder found himself constantly amazed by the miracle of it. He would place his hand on her stomach and feel the baby kick, and the reality of impending fatherhood would hit him all over again. He bought a book about babies and child rearing, struggling through the more complicated medical terms, but determined to understand what Rebecca and the baby would need. In late January of 1880, on a bitterly cold night, with snow falling thick outside, Rebecca went into labor. Ryder had prepared for this, had read about it, and talked to the midwife who would be attending the birth, but nothing could have prepared him for the reality of watching the woman he loved in pain, knowing there was nothing he could do to help her. The labor lasted through the night and into the next day. The midwife, a capable woman named Mrs. Henderson, stayed with Rebecca the entire time, and she allowed Ryder to stay as well, which was unusual. Most men were sent away during childbirth, but Mrs. Henderson said she could see how much Rebecca wanted him there, and she was a modern thinker who believed fathers should be present. Ryder held Rebecca's hand through it all, wiping her forehead with a cool cloth and whispering encouragement. She was incredibly brave, never crying out even when he could see the pain was intense. And finally, after what felt like an eternity, the baby came. The first sound Ryder heard was a loud, angry wail, and Mrs. Henderson laughed in delight. "A boy," she announced, holding up the squalling infant. "A healthy, strong boy." Ryder felt tears streaming down his face as he looked at his son for the first time. The baby was red and wrinkled and covered in vernix, and he was the most beautiful thing Ryder had ever seen. Mrs. Henderson cleaned the baby quickly and then placed him in Rebecca's arms. "Hello, little one," Rebecca whispered, her voice hoarse from exertion but full of wonder. "Hello, my sweet boy." Ryder leaned down to look at them both, his wife and his son, and felt his heart swell so large he thought it might burst. "He is perfect," he said in awe. "Rebecca, he is perfect." "He is," Rebecca agreed, then looked up at Ryder with tears in her own eyes. "What should we name him?" They had discussed names but had not settled on anything definite. Now looking at his son's tiny face, Ryder felt a name rising up from somewhere deep inside him. "Thomas," he said softly, "after your first husband, if that is all right with you. He was a good man, and he helped make you who you are. I would like to honor that." Rebecca's tears spilled over at that, and she nodded, unable to speak for a moment. When she found her voice, it was thick with emotion. "Thank you, Ryder. That is more generous than you know." Thomas would have been honored. They named their son Thomas Ryder Crawford, and he was the light of their lives from the moment he was born. Ryder threw himself into fatherhood with the same determination he had brought to learning to read. He changed diapers and walked the floor with the baby when he cried at night. He read to Thomas, even though the infant was far too young to understand, wanting his son to hear words and language from the very beginning. Rebecca recovered slowly from the birth, and Ryder took care of both her and the baby, barely sleeping himself but refusing to complain. The people of Hill City who had doubted him at first began to see what Rebecca had seen all along. Ryder Crawford was a good man, a devoted husband and father, someone who had simply needed a chance to prove himself. As Thomas grew from an infant to a toddler, Ryder's reading continued to improve. By the time Thomas was 2 years old in 1882, Ryder could read almost anything, though he still sometimes needed help with very complex texts. He read the newspaper every morning, keeping up with events in the territory and the wider world. He read stories to Thomas every night, doing different voices for the characters and making his son giggle with delight. In the summer of 1882, Rebecca became pregnant again. This time the pregnancy was easier, and in March of 1883, they welcomed a daughter they named Rose Rebecca Crawford. She had Rebecca's auburn hair and green eyes, and Ryder fell in love with her immediately, just as he had with Thomas. Life settled into a comfortable rhythm. The store prospered, and Ryder and Rebecca were able to buy the building outright, no longer having to pay rent to a landlord in Rapid City. They expanded the living quarters, adding a second room so the children did not have to sleep in the same space as their parents. Ryder built furniture in his spare time, discovering he had a knack for carpentry. Thomas proved to be a bright, curious child, and Ryder made sure he learned his letters as soon as he was old enough. By the time Thomas was 4, he could recognize the entire alphabet and read simple words. Ryder felt an immense pride in this, knowing his son would never struggle the way he had. One evening in the spring of 1884, when Thomas was 4 and Rose was just over a year old, the family sat together by the evening fire. Thomas was playing with wooden blocks Ryder had carved for him, and Rose was drowsing in Rebecca's arms. Ryder was reading the newspaper, his eyes scanning the printed words with ease that still sometimes surprised him. "Papa," Thomas said suddenly, looking up from his blocks, "can you read me a story?" "Of course," Ryder said, setting aside the newspaper and picking up the book of frontier tales that was still his favorite. "Which one would you like to hear?" "The one about the mountain man and the bear," Thomas requested, climbing into Ryder's lap. Ryder opened the book to the right page and began to read, his voice steady and sure. Thomas listened with rapt attention, asking questions and making comments. When Ryder finished, Thomas clapped his hands. "You read so good, Papa," the boy said admiringly. Ryder felt emotion welling up in his throat. 6 years ago, he had been a drifter who could not read a single word on paper. Now he was reading bedtime stories to his son in a home he owned, with a wife he adored, and 2 children he would die to protect. The transformation still seemed miraculous. "Your papa worked very hard to learn to read," Rebecca said gently, having watched the exchange with a knowing smile. "Your mama taught him by the evening fire, just like this one." "Mama taught you?" Thomas asked, looking at Ryder with wide eyes. "She did," Ryder confirmed. "When I met your mama, I did not know how to read at all, but she was patient and kind, and she taught me letters one at a time. It took a long time, and sometimes it was very hard. But I kept trying, and eventually I learned." "Can you teach me too?" Thomas asked eagerly. "I am already teaching you," Ryder said, hugging his son close. "Every time we read together, you are learning. And by the time you are grown, you will read even better than I do." Thomas seemed satisfied with this answer and went back to his blocks. Ryder looked over at Rebecca and found her watching him with tears shining in her eyes. "What is it?" he asked softly. "I was just thinking about that first night," Rebecca said. "When you came crashing through my window, bleeding and terrified. I never could have imagined then that we would end up here like this." "Neither could I," Ryder admitted. "I thought I was going to die that night. Instead, I found everything I did not even know I was looking for." "I am glad you found me," Rebecca said. "I am glad you taught me," Ryder replied. "Not just how to read, but how to live, how to love, how to be part of a family." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the fire burn low and the children play and doze. Ryder thought about all the years he had spent alone, wandering from place to place with no purpose or direction. Those years seemed like another lifetime now, like they had happened to someone else entirely. He thought about that piece of paper Rebecca had given him the first night, with the alphabet carefully drawn in her neat handwriting. He still had it, tucked away in a drawer with other precious mementos. Sometimes he would take it out and look at it, remembering how impossible it had seemed that he would ever learn to read. But Rebecca had believed in him when he did not believe in himself, and her faith had changed everything. As the years passed, Ryder and Rebecca's family continued to grow. In 1885, they welcomed another son, whom they named Samuel. In 1887, they had twin daughters, Emma and Grace. The living quarters behind the store became too crowded, so Ryder built a house on a piece of land they purchased on the edge of town. It was a beautiful house with 4 bedrooms and a wide front porch, and Ryder was fiercely proud of it. The store continued to prosper, becoming one of the most successful businesses in Hill City. Ryder's reputation as a fair and honest merchant grew, and people came from miles around to trade with the Crawfords. The fact that Ryder had taught himself to read as an adult became something of a local legend, and he occasionally helped other adults who wanted to learn, passing on the gift Rebecca had given him. Thomas grew into a fine young man, smart and hardworking like his father. He helped in the store and talked about becoming a teacher someday, wanting to help others learn the way his mother had helped his father. Rose was creative and artistic, always drawing and painting. Samuel was quiet and thoughtful, happiest when he was reading a book. The twins were wild and mischievous, keeping Ryder and Rebecca constantly on their toes. Through it all, Ryder never forgot where he had come from or how far he had come. Every evening, no matter how busy or tired he was, he made time to read by the fire. Sometimes it was the newspaper, sometimes a novel, sometimes just the letters the children wrote to practice their penmanship. But the act of reading, which had once seemed as impossible as flying to the moon, remained a source of deep satisfaction and joy. On their 10th wedding anniversary in December of 1888, Ryder gave Rebecca a special gift. It was a journal, bound in fine leather with their names embossed on the cover. "What is this for?" Rebecca asked, turning it over in her hands admiringly. I thought we could write our story, Ryder explained. Everything that happened from the day we met until now. That way, our children and grandchildren will know how we found each other and how you taught me to read by the evening fire. Rebecca's eyes filled with tears, as they often did when Ryder did something particularly thoughtful. That is a wonderful idea, but you must write it, Ryder. Your handwriting has become so beautiful, and the story is as much yours as mine. We will write it together, Ryder compromised, just like we do everything else. And so they did. On winter evenings when the children were asleep, Ryder and Rebecca would sit by the fire and write their story in the journal. They took turns, sometimes writing whole sections alone, sometimes composing together. They wrote about that first chaotic meeting, about the reading lessons, about falling in love. They wrote about their wedding and the births of their children, about building the house and growing the business. They wrote about challenges they had faced and triumphs they had celebrated. It took them 2 years to finish, filling every page of the journal with their careful script. When it was done, Ryder placed it in a wooden box he had built specially for it, along with that original piece of paper with the alphabet on it. He put the box on a high shelf in their bedroom, telling Rebecca it was their most valuable possession. More valuable than the store or the house? Rebecca teased. Much more, Ryder said seriously. Those are just things. This is our history, our love story. This is proof that people can change, that it is never too late to learn or grow or become something more than you were. In 1890, Thomas left home to attend the university in Vermilion, wanting to become a teacher as he had always dreamed. It was hard for Ryder and Rebecca to see him go, but they were immensely proud of him. Rose began working with a painter in Rapid City, apprenticing to learn proper technique. Samuel took over much of the day-to-day running of the store, proving to have a sharp head for business. The twins were still in school, causing trouble and making their teachers alternately laugh and tear their hair out. Ryder turned 40 in 1894, and Rebecca threw him a surprise party at the house. All their children were there, even Thomas, who had come home from university, and many of their friends and neighbors. There were speeches and toasts, and Ryder felt embarrassed but deeply touched by the outpouring of affection. When I came to Hill City 16 years ago, I had nothing, Ryder said when it was his turn to speak. I was alone and uneducated, just drifting through life with no real purpose. Then I met Rebecca, and she changed everything. She taught me to read, yes, but more importantly, she taught me that I was worth something. She taught me that I could build a life, have a family, be someone. Everything good in my life comes from her, and I will spend the rest of my days being grateful that I crashed through that window all those years ago. There was not a dry eye in the room, and Rebecca came over to embrace him, whispering that she loved him. The party went late into the night, filled with laughter and music and good food. As Ryder looked around at all the people gathered in his home, at his children and his wife, at the life he had built from nothing, he felt a contentment so deep it was almost painful. The turn of the century in 1900 was marked with great celebration. Ryder was 46 now, his dark hair streaked with silver at the temples. Rebecca was 43, still beautiful with laugh lines around her eyes that Ryder thought made her even more attractive. Their children were grown, or nearly so, building their own lives. Thomas had indeed become a teacher, working at a school in Pierre, and engaged to be married to a lovely young woman named Catherine. Rose had her own studio in Rapid City, selling paintings to wealthy clients in the East. Samuel was running the store now, with Ryder helping out but mostly retired. The twins had just finished school and were trying to decide what to do with their lives. On a quiet evening in the spring of 1901, Ryder and Rebecca sat alone by their fire, a rare occurrence now that the house was so often full of visiting children and grandchildren. Rose had recently given birth to their first grandchild, a boy named Jacob, and the experience of holding his grandson had moved Ryder almost to tears. "Can you believe it has been almost 23 years since we met?" Rebecca asked, leaning against Ryder's shoulder. "Sometimes it feels like yesterday," Ryder said. "Sometimes it feels like a lifetime ago." I was a completely different person then. We both were, Rebecca said. Younger, more uncertain. But I would not change anything. Every moment, every choice led us here. I would not change anything either, Ryder agreed. He stood and went to the shelf where they kept the wooden box with their journal. He brought it back to the fireside and opened it, taking out the old, yellowed paper with the alphabet on it. Look at this, he said, showing it to Rebecca. Your handwriting was so neat and careful. You drew little pictures next to each letter to help me remember. A for apple, Rebecca said, smiling at the memory. B for barrel. R for Ryder and Rebecca, Ryder added, touching the letter R gently. Our letter. They sat looking at the paper for a long time, remembering that first night and all the nights that had followed. Remembering the patience and persistence, the breakthroughs and setbacks, the gradual transformation from ignorance to knowledge. You know what the best part was? Ryder said eventually. It was not just learning to read, though that changed my life. The best part was spending those evenings with you, by the evening fire, falling in love. The reading lessons were wonderful, but they were also an excuse to be together, to talk and laugh and get to know each other. I know, Rebecca said softly. I treasured those evenings. I still treasure our evenings together. Me too, Ryder said, kissing the top of her head. I treasure every moment with you, Rebecca. You saved me in every way a person can be saved. They sat in peaceful silence, watching the fire burn low. Outside, Hill City was quiet, the streets empty as people settled in for the night. Inside, Ryder and Rebecca Crawford were content, surrounded by the evidence of the life they had built together. The journal in its wooden box sat open beside them, pages filled with their shared history. The paper with the alphabet, carefully preserved for over 2 decades, rested on Ryder's knee. These were the artifacts of their love story, tangible proof of how far they had come. But the real proof was in the life they had created. It was in the children they had raised, good and kind and educated. It was in the store that had served the community for decades. It was in the home they had filled with love and laughter. It was in the way they still looked at each other, after all these years, with the same warmth and affection they had felt by that evening fire so long ago. Ryder carefully folded the paper and placed it back in the box with the journal. He closed the lid and set it aside, then pulled Rebecca closer to him. They sat together by the dying fire, content in each other's presence, not needing words to communicate the depth of their feelings. Shall we read for a while before bed? Rebecca asked eventually. I would like that, Ryder said. Rebecca retrieved a book from the shelf, one they had been reading together for the past few weeks. It was a new novel, full of adventure and romance, and they were both enjoying it. She handed it to Ryder, and he opened it to where they had left off, marked with a ribbon. He began to read aloud, his voice clear and steady. The words flowed smoothly now, no hesitation or stumbling. Rebecca closed her eyes and listened, a smile playing at her lips. This was her favorite way to end the day, listening to Ryder read to her, his voice wrapping around her like a warm blanket. When Ryder finished the chapter, he closed the book and set it aside. They banked the fire and walked hand in hand to their bedroom. As they prepared for sleep, Ryder thought about how different his life would have been if he had never crashed through that window, if Rebecca had not taken him in and taught him. He would probably still be drifting from town to town, alone and illiterate, never knowing what he was missing. He would never have known the joy of reading a book, the pride of writing his own name, the satisfaction of helping his children with their lessons. He would never have known the deep, abiding love he felt for Rebecca, or the happiness of being a father and grandfather. That one night in September of 1878 had changed everything. It had set him on a path he could never have imagined, led him to a life richer and fuller than he had ever dreamed possible. And it had all started with a simple act of kindness from a young widow who saw past his rough exterior to the man he could become. As Ryder lay in bed with Rebecca curled against his side, he sent up a silent prayer of gratitude. Gratitude for that desperate night that had brought him to Rebecca's door. Gratitude for her patience and kindness. Gratitude for the reading lessons by the evening fire that had transformed his life. And most of all, gratitude for the love they had found together. A love that had sustained them through more than 2 decades and would, he hoped, sustain them for many more years to come. In the years that followed, Ryder and Rebecca continued to thrive. They watched their children marry and have children of their own, filling their lives with joy. They celebrated anniversaries and birthdays, mourned losses, and rejoiced in triumphs. Through it all, they remained devoted to each other, their love growing deeper and richer with each passing year. On their 30th wedding anniversary in December of 1908, their children threw them a grand party. All 5 of their children were there with their spouses and children. Thomas had 3 children now. Rose had 4, Samuel had 2, and the twins each had 1. 13 grandchildren in total, ranging in age from newborn to 7 years old, running and playing and filling the house with noise and laughter. "Look at what we created," Rebecca said to Ryder as they watched the chaos with fond amusement. "You created this," Ryder corrected gently. "If you had not taken a chance on me, none of them would be here." "We created this together," Rebecca insisted. "You were not the only one who needed saving, Ryder. I was lonely and lost after Thomas died, going through the motions of living but not really feeling anything. You brought me back to life, gave me purpose and passion and love. We saved each other." Ryder could not argue with that. They had saved each other, in ways both obvious and subtle. They had built a life together that was more than the sum of its parts, a family and a legacy that would endure long after they were gone. As the evening wore on and the grandchildren were put to bed in various rooms throughout the house, the adult children gathered around Ryder and Rebecca. "We have something for you," Thomas said, presenting them with a large, wrapped package. Ryder and Rebecca opened it together and found themselves looking at a painting. It was Rose's work, they could tell immediately, but it was unlike anything she had done before. It showed a small room lit by firelight with a man and a woman sitting at a table. The man was bent over a piece of paper, his face concentrated as he traced letters with his finger. The woman was leaning toward him, her expression patient and encouraging. In the background, there was a window with darkness beyond it, suggesting the night when they first met. "I call it Lessons by Evening Fire," Rose said softly. "It is you two, of course, Papa learning to read from Mama, the way you told us about in your journal." Rebecca was crying openly now, and even Ryder felt his eyes sting with tears. It was beautiful, capturing not just the physical reality of those nights, but the emotion of them, the love and dedication and hope. "It is perfect," Rebecca managed to say. "Thank you, all of you." "You are welcome," Thomas said, speaking for all of his siblings. "We wanted to honor the story of how our parents fell in love. You have given us so much, taught us so much. Not just reading and writing, but about perseverance and kindness and what real love looks like." They hung the painting in the parlor where everyone could see it, and it became a cherished family heirloom. Visitors would ask about it, and Ryder and Rebecca would tell the story of how they met, how she taught him to read, how they fell in love by the evening fire. The story never got old, and they never tired of telling it. As they grew older, Ryder and Rebecca slowed down. They spent most of their time at home now, surrounded by their children and grandchildren. Ryder's hair went completely white, and he developed a stoop in his shoulders from years of physical labor. Rebecca's auburn hair faded to gray, and her hands became gnarled with arthritis. But they were still devoted to each other, still holding hands as they sat by the fire in the evenings. They still read together every night, though now they sometimes fell asleep before finishing a chapter. The act of reading, which had brought them together all those years ago, remained a constant in their lives, a ritual that connected them to their past and to each other. In the spring of 1915, Ryder fell ill with pneumonia. He was 61 years old, and the illness hit him hard. Rebecca nursed him devotedly, barely sleeping as she sat by his bedside. The children came, bringing the grandchildren to visit, but Ryder was too weak to do more than smile at them. One night, when it was just Ryder and Rebecca alone, he reached for her hand and held it weakly. "I want you to know," he whispered hoarsely, "that you made my life worth living. I would have been nothing without you." "Do not talk like that," Rebecca said, tears streaming down her face. "You are going to get better. You have to get better." But they both knew the truth. Ryder was dying, and no amount of wishing would change that. "Read to me," Ryder asked, "like you used to. Read me something we both love." Rebecca retrieved the book of frontier tales, the one that had been Ryder's favorite for so many years. Her voice shaking, she began to read the story of the mountain man and the bear, the same story Ryder had read to Thomas so many years ago. As she read, Ryder closed his eyes and smiled. He could see it all in his mind, the mountain and the bear and the brave man. But more than that, he could see all the other things Rebecca had given him through reading. He could see worlds he had never visited, people he had never met, ideas he had never considered. Reading had opened up the universe to him, had made him more than he ever thought he could be. And it had all started with one piece of paper, one patient teacher, and the evening fire. Rebecca finished the story and looked down at Ryder, only to realize he had stopped breathing. He was gone, slipped away peacefully while she read to him, just as he would have wanted. Rebecca Crawford lived for another 12 years after Ryder's death, surrounded by her loving family. She never remarried, saying that she had already had 2 husbands in her life and that was enough. She spent her days with her grandchildren and great-grandchildren, teaching them to read just as she had taught Ryder so many years before. She would tell them the story of their grandfather, the cowboy who could not read a single word on paper when they first met. She would tell them how she taught him letters by the evening fire, how he worked so hard to learn, how proud she was of him. She would show them the painting Rose had made and the journal they had written together, and the old piece of paper with the alphabet on it. "Your grandfather was one of the finest men I ever knew," she would say. "Not because he learned to read, though that was important, but because he never gave up, never stopped trying to be better. He loved fiercely and worked hard and treated people with respect. Those are the things that made him special." When Rebecca died in 1927 at the age of 70, she was laid to rest next to Ryder in the Hill City Cemetery. Their children placed a headstone that read, "Ryder Crawford, 1854-1915, Rebecca Adams Crawford, 1857-1927. Beloved parents and grandparents." He could not read. She taught him letters together. They built a legacy of love. The story of Ryder and Rebecca Crawford became a treasured family legend, passed down through generations. Their journal, carefully preserved, was read by children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, each one marveling at the love story contained in its pages. The painting Rose had made hung in a place of honor in Thomas's house, and then in his son's house, and so on down through the years. And every generation learned the same lesson that Ryder and Rebecca had lived, that it is never too late to learn, never too late to change, never too late to find love. That education is a gift that can transform lives, and that patience and kindness can work miracles. That sometimes the most important lessons are taught not in schools or churches, but in small rooms by evening fires, between 2 people who care enough to teach and learn from each other. The legacy of that first night in September 1878, when a desperate cowboy crashed through a window and into the life of a lonely widow, lived on in every member of the Crawford family. It lived on in their commitment to education, in their devotion to family, in their belief that people are capable of extraordinary growth and change. It lived on in the way they loved each other, fiercely and faithfully, through good times and bad. And somewhere, perhaps, Ryder and Rebecca Crawford were together again, sitting by an eternal evening fire, reading to each other from books filled with endless stories, their love as strong in death as it had been in life. They had found each other against all odds, had built something beautiful from nothing and had shown the world what was possible when two people truly committed to each other. Their story was one of transformation and redemption, of patience and perseverance, of the power of education and the enduring strength of love. It was a story worth remembering, worth telling, worth honoring. And it all began with the simple act of teaching a man who could not read a single word on paper, showing him letters by the evening fire, and falling in love in the process.